Okay, so the next topic we are going to deal with here is figuring out how to use this kind of analysis to achieve a particular target income. So we've calculated break even with a target income or with an income of zero, up one side and down the other. And now we're just basically going to apply the same techniques and the same thought process to figuring out how much we need to sell in order to make our profit objectives for the year. And of course, the reason that this is so relevant is because quite often executives' compensation is tied to meeting certain profit targets, right? And so, managing sales will get you your bonuses, basically, is what that's about. So this is how you do these kinds of analyses, very similar to what we just did. So obviously nobody actually wants to make a zero profit except for young companies that are looking forward to that day when their profit is not negative, right? And so what we do, to get to a particular target income, we just change one little element of our equation. Remember, our break even was fixed cost over contribution margin per unit to get to the number of units that we need to sell. Well, if we just add our target income here to the numerator, then divide by the contribution margin per unit, that'll give us our number of units we need to sell in order to earn a particular target income. And our example, we're back to our lawnmower example, where we've got variable cost of $325, sales price of $400, and fixed cost of $45, and we want to know how much we need to sell in order to make a $37,500 profit. Okay, so let's just figure that out real quick. And here is the calculation. We've got our total fixed cost plus our target income over the unit contribution margin. So that means that our total fixed costs were $45, our target income was $37.5, and our contribution margin per unit was $75. That means that our target number of sales units is 1,100 units, and now we're just going to check and make sure that that does in fact get us to where we want to be by doing a little contribution margin income statement to check our calculation. And here it is. We've got $400 times 1,100 gives us total sales revenues of $440,000. 325 times 1,100 gives us a total variable expenses of $357.5, giving us a total contribution margin of $82.5. Subtract out our fixed expenses of $45, and that in fact does give us our $37.5 operating income. So our calculations were correct. Okay, we can also, just like we did with our break even, it's not just about the number of units you sell, but how much your sales revenue is going to be in order to get to our $37.5 target income. And just like before, our formula is that the sales dollars to earn the targeted income is the fixed cost plus the target income over the contribution margin ratio. Right? Remember, our contribution margin ratio was 18.75, I believe. So here's the wordy explanation of what it is that we're trying to do. We want to calculate the contribution margin ratio, which we did before. Calculate the sales revenue, right? Not the unit sales, but the revenue. Of course, we know it's going to be 240. And then we want to prepare a contribution margin income statement. So just like before, this is starting to get very repetitious, right? And so here is our contribution margin ratio of 18.75%. And then our sales dollars is going to be, 37.5 plus 45 divided by that 18.75%, or 440,000, in order to get to this 37,500. By the way, as an aside, economists consider profit to be a cost. And this explains part of why that is, right? Because you treat your profit or your target income in this equation the same way that you treat a fixed cost. Your desired profit acts like a cost in terms of your managerial decision making. Isn't that interesting, huh? And so, just like before, here is our contribution margin income statement based on our sales revenue, 440. Our variable expenses is going to be our variable expense margin or variable cost margin of 81.25%, which gives us our variable expenses of 357.5. Our contribution margin is 82.5, fixed expense 45, and that gives us our operating income of 37.5. Now, one of the other things that managers use this kind of analysis for on a very, very regular basis is to look and see how much profit is going to change if revenue changes, right? Because obviously, if you have any kind of variable expenses at all, your increases in sales will not all flow down to the bottom line, right? The only thing that's going to flow down to your profit is going to be the contribution margin or the excess of sales over variable cost, right? So if you know your contribution margin ratio, then you know that if you sales change, right? So if we have an 18.75% contribution margin ratio, then if we increase sales by some amount, 18.75% of that is going to flow into the profit. That's logical, right? Now, being an economist, I love a graph, and I am going to want you to at least be able to look at graphs and understand what's going on in terms of profitability and break-even. And so let's go ahead and take a look at some graphs. We'll look at those in the next slides. So what we do to create a cost volume profit graph is that we graph two lines, the total revenue line and the total cost line, with units along the axis. And so this is what a cost volume profit graph looks like. We have units sold on the horizontal axis, right? So just like in economics, this is Q. And here we have our dollars, right? So this is not revenue or expense, it's both, right? So that's why we're not naming the vertical axis sales dollars or cost dollars, right? And so we have fixed expenses, right? So this is what we're looking at here. Here's our fixed expense line or fixed cost line. This should look like economics, right? Here's our fixed cost, right? And then our variable costs are $5 per unit. And our, doesn't tell you what our price is, but our variable costs are $5 a unit. I'm going to overdraw over the cost line. So here's $5 per unit. So this just goes up at a rate of $5 per unit. And our fixed cost is 100. And then our revenue, right? I will, let's see, I'll make the revenue line blue, maybe black. Yeah. So our revenue line at 0 units sold, we have 0 revenue. It goes up. It goes up. We still have lower revenue. Right here is the point at which our revenue meets our fixed costs. But because we have variable costs, we still aren't breaking even. But at this point, at 20 units, we have $200. So therefore our sales price per unit is $10. So at 20 units, we have $200 right here, right? And so everything above that starts to be profit. So this is our cost volume profit graph. And it is useful for anyone who is a visual thinker to see, right, what happens at particular points. You know, if you're selling 15 units, you can just quickly see, nope, I'm not going to make it. Even without doing all the math, if you have these lines drawn on a graph, you can just see where you're going to be at different levels. At, 50 units, yep, you are going to be making a profit, okay? So that's kind of how people use these graphs. It's nice to have a visual representation of those things that you are calculating.